Dear participants, now we are moving ahead with our session 5, which is on theme is globalization and mother tongue. And we have very eminent panel. I welcome Mr. Yogendra Puranik, who is basically a Tokyo Advoga City Councillor from Japan. Welcome, Mr. Yogi, and thanks for sparing your valuable time to be part of this panel. We also have Dr. Margit Kopes. She is teaching Hungarian language at University of Delhi and a very eminent linguist and working on different projects and policies in promotion, propagation, and preservation of languages. We also have Professor Avdesh Kumar Mishra. He is teaching at English and Foreign Language University, Shillong campus. Thank you, Professor Mishra, and I welcome you to this panel and uh, look forward to your all discussion. The theme which we are talking here is globalization and mother tongue. See, we all know mother tongue is the individual identity of a human being. We need to understand that uh, still mother language play a very critical role in historical, political, economic, social, and cultural contexts. Uh, but if you see last uh, a few decades, starting from I think in India, if you see after 90s, this globalization has had a global, a huge impact uh, on development of the country. And with this globalization, uh, English has become an international language. And it may be because of job opportunity, it may be because of various other reasons. So the idea behind having this discussion was just to uh, seek the opinions and have discussion that how this globalization has an impact on this preservation of languages, and particularly what is the significance of mother tongue in this new world of globalization? Where when I see the figure in 2011 Indian Census Survey, that language have been reduced to about 122. So that the huge gap, almost 50% of identifiable mother tongues have been extinct or not able to come in this survey. So definitely, last 20 years we have seen a huge impact on all of us. So we have very eminent panel. I don't want to take more time in my introductory remarks. So I would like to invite our request my colleague Ms. Ritu Mathur to introduce our first panelist, Mr. Yogendra Puranik, and then I would like to invite him to deliver his address. Rituji.
Thank you, sir. So, welcome, Yogendra San. So, for everybody who doesn't know Mr. Yogendra Puranik, he's lovingly called Yogendra San with his friends. He's a city councillor at Edogawa City, first Asian to be elected in Japan, and he is basically a management graduate from IIM Calcutta, and he has a master's in international and managerial economics from University of Pune, has a diploma in information technology from Datamatics, and studied in Japan, India, China, Singapore, Malaysia, and United States. So you have total globalization in one person. So he would be the best person to tell us about the challenges of globalization versus mother tongue, because I understand Japan, though they have some dialects in some part of the country, but majorly is the Japanese is the main language, national language. And in India, we have 22 official languages, but we still don't have a national language. And language, mother tongue, and language is directly connected with employment. So how does this challenge, how do you help this thing come, overcome this issue of promoting mother tongue and also opportunities for employment in the country? So over to Yogi San.
Amazing. So, so actually taking it just in the front line, it's difficult to start up. I thought actually some senior professors will start, and then I can mingle in. uh, well, you can just call me Yogi. And as usual, like in India, in my childhood, I started with my mother tongue Marathi, and then at the same time, from kindergarten, as usually, we start learning 3 and 4 languages. So it was for me, it was English, Hindi, and Sanskrit. And as I went to the middle school, I started learning Spanish. Then in my high school, I started learning German. Then in university, I learned Japanese. And finally, I learned Chinese because I got married to a Chinese. So in all these, what I feel is like uh, I have actually enjoyed all the languages wherever I went. But definitely, one strong point of the mother language is that the level of understanding in the mother language, the amount of literature that you would have gone through in your mother language, is definitely actually a very the volume is very high as compared to any other languages that you learn later. And the kind of actually say like very usually I talk to people, and like pulling up jokes in your mother language is so easy. So making a conversation in the mother language is always soft, and it's enjoyable. uh, Having said that, like in India, even me, like we are English speakers, as good as may not call as native, but we are near native. And now in Japan, I am a near native Japanese language speaker. I can even challenge speaking Japanese, the Japanese language spoken ability of some Japanese people. So having said that, of course, again, like the kind of versatility I will find in my mother language, uh, uh, being actually trained in it from when I was born, of course the strength actually lies there, is what I believe. Now from maybe I think we can just go on rotating, and maybe later we can talk about take topics actually, employment and economics and social. How shall we proceed? While being in India, we have been always actually multilingual, and we have been very diverse. Particularly, I studied in Kendriya Vidyalaya, so we had actually students from all parts of India in our classes. So uh, uh, there was no such language barrier. And in fact, if you remember, like in our childhood days, it used to be just the national television, and every weekend there will be different language movies, and we would just like sit in front of those movies and we would enjoy them. The language wasn't a barrier. Actually, maybe our brains were used to actually to understand or to imagine what's going on there. Now when actually I came to Japan, I actually initially knew Japanese language. But even after understanding Japanese language to a great level, or to a good level, I found that there are some very typical nuances, or a typical way of expressing things. Those were very specific to these people, and those could not be learned in overseas, or could not be learned in overnight. So from that perspective, I think that was the time I started thinking about language. When in India, I was not thinking about language. I was just talking the language. But after coming to overseas, it gave me an opportunity to think about the language, to compare languages, how you would say the same thing in different languages. And honestly, it's a fun. That is what I believed. So one thing is, like in Japan, there has been always a debate whether Japan should be unilingual or monolingual, or it should be multilingual. And the monolingual thought has always won in Japan for centuries, I would say. Even in recent years, there is a continuous dialogue or a debate going on, even in the political streams, whether how much Japan should include English language education. And honestly speaking, that aspect has been like including English in Japan has been very difficult. So Japan has chosen to be actually monolingual from that perspective. Well, now there could be merits and demerits both to being a monolingual country. So what I think actually the benefits of being a monolingual country would be Like particularly in Japan, the whole education from nursery to university for all subjects is in Japanese. Right now, they are just they have actually introduced English in few schools, in public school for few years. However, it is just for having fun. It is not actually to create linguistic skills so that people are actually able to express themselves or use that language in a day-to-day sense, kind of the way actually we do in India. So Japan is actually completely away from that thought line of thought. Uh, but having monolingual kind of environment gives them has actually given them a benefit of bringing in 100% literacy, is what I believe. All the people are focused on learning one language, not multiple languages, and it has ensured a good level of mastery in the language and a higher ability to express things, including, say, even medical terms. I have seen Japanese people, they are very used to medical terms, including names of diseases, names of medicines. That's because actually they have mastered in only one language. And in also scientific and chemical terms. Even a person who is just middle school graduate, he can very well actually use terms from very industry specific terms. And that is because they are just using this single language in all sorts of communication. And the other thing I found is actually being monolingual has helped them to create a barrier against unnecessary information from the overseas. So they are basically focusing on the information that is domestically available for their own country, and creeping out all the unnecessary information from that is coming from the overseas. For that matter, actually, Japanese people would depend completely on their local media, which is the Japanese media, and the amount of information that media would provide, and the way the media would translate, so that actually it is understood in Japan. So the translation factor and lost in translation also works a lot out there in Japan. From the social perspective, I think uh, the good part is about ability to speak to anybody in any part of Japan. So like in India in 1994, when I first traveled to Chennai, the rickshaw drivers would even not allow me to take the rickshaw because I was not able to tell them where I want to go, which route I want to go. So I actually experienced that in India in 1994. Now it is changing, but still I think in various parts of India, still people talk only the local language, which could be actually sometimes a very high barrier in travel, in business. But in Japan, you go to any part of Japan and everybody speaks Japanese. So that's probably one strong part of it. However, if you see on the other side of it, or maybe I'll just talk the merits before first, and then I'll talk the demerits. Just learning Japanese also creates a peculiar way of talking or expressing things, and that is what actually the Japanese people get used to. If another language comes into the picture, I am particularly seeing with those Japanese people who go overseas, they learn other languages, and when they come back, they try to actually create special expressions, which are actually then not so much understood or appreciated by the monolinguistic Japanese people. So that's one way to look at maybe merit, to develop some special ways of talking. Then from the education perspective, I think it helps to promote a lot of nationalism, and Japan has tried to do that, to actually keep people stringed into one nationalistic thought. Of course, they employ various techniques in the education to do that, so that people are made to follow the rules. People are made to being compassionate for others in terms of following the rules. But language also, I think, is playing a very vital role in promoting nationalism. It allows students to focus more on the domestic history and culture, because if more literature is coming in through different languages, I think people will be prone to going into other aspects, other countries. But having one language in the education is actually helping them make the students focus on the domestic history and culture. However, what I think is that Japanese language is a bit difficult language because there are so many characters. In order to express, like to speak or to read a newspaper, you must be able to read around 2000 different characters, and those are from simple to very difficult kind of. So one demerit there is people actually take a longer cycle to learn the full language that is required to read a newspaper, and that comes to around until around maybe just reading. I am saying it's not about understanding the whole newspaper. So and from business perspective, uh, uh, I'm not sure how much actually the business success of Japan would be attributed only to Japanese language, but definitely the culture that language helps in to bring in, particularly the 5S culture in Japan. I think that could have helped Japanese businesses to prosper. I don't have any base to actually support that. Having said that, in practical terms, I have seen that Japanese people use Japanese language as a tool to do confidential conversations in front of their overseas counterparts, and they also take it as an excuse to avoid taking immediate decisions. So they will just say like, okay, let us go back, let us go through the documentation, and then we will actually give you a judgment. So they very actually safely use it as an excuse. From the sports perspective, it is same as education. I see actually there is a lot of problem in Japanese sports people communicating with the overseas sports person. When Japanese are going overseas, or when overseas people are coming to Japan, there is this actually information barrier is definitely there. And from the political perspective, again, I think it helps promote nationalism. And I have actually heard it many a times that it helps actually bring in political stability. Now, that can be actually seen in various countries as well. Uh, I'm not sure if multilingualism brings in political instability in India, if we reverse it. But in Japan, they are saying that monolinguality definitely brings in political stability. Uh, Now, from the demerits perspective, uh, it is said by the statistics actually given by the Ministry of Education in Japan. It is said like only 3 to 4% of Japanese people can speak sensible English. That makes sense. That makes some meaning. So it is a very low percentage in Japan. In fact, more than 70% of people don't even speak even a little of Japanese. So that's the actually level where Japan is actually monolingual. And from information sharing and social perspective, I'm talking about the demerits now. The lack in speed and volume of global information availability is one of the dangerous things actually that I feel in Japan. Is the overseas literature, or say the movies, has to wait for the translation before actually the literature hits the stands, or the movies hit the theaters. uh, Again, I feel like Japan lacks cultural diversity because of monolinguality, and that is one reason why Japan could face friction as the immigrant population in Japan increases. I think that's one actually benefit factor in Japan, in India, that we are by default diverse and multicultural because of the multiple regional languages and our access to those languages. So I am actually very concerned about this part in Japan, and because of this monolinguality, they are inclined to form their own opinions in their own way. Probably language brings in a particular way of thought process, and being monolingual, Japanese actually stick to one thought is what I believe from my experience. And I have actually heard from many Japanese people who know foreign languages. They usually claim that actually Japanese language is a bit stiff language as compared to other languages, because other languages have more jokes, more jokeability. Typically, they tell like me, like when you Indians speak, you guys are always smiling. You are always laughing at something when you guys are speaking. And I also feel it true, because I don't see Japanese people actually being happy when they're actually in a day-to-day life. Maybe it's their nature also, but I think the kind of jokes that foreign languages like say Marathi, Hindi, that we can actually create jokes in these languages. I'm not seeing that capability in Japanese language.
So thank you, Yogi, for your wonderful views, and I think that's quite relevant. Definitely, we'll come back to you one if we have time in the end, because there are two more panelists to speak on the subject. So now I would like to invite Professor Margit Kopes. She is teaching Hungarian languages at University of Delhi. I believe you are here from 1983 in India, so you are more of Indian than Hungarian, and you are quite familiar with the globalization. Takes started in India, and having a wider experience of. She also very well connected with the agency and Hungarian Cultural Center in different programs. So and, now I request you to let us know your views on this very important topic, your own
Thank,
perspective.
thank you, Professor Gaur, for your kind introduction. I'd like to share my screen because I thought since I'm using a number of Hungarian names, perhaps it's it's better if I let them, more concrete information is known. So in 2021, it is a known fact that many of the world's 6,000 and India's, as Professor Gaur mentioned, 122 languages may disappear in the globalized informational society. Other languages will play a role in families, but not in the wider business and academic world. Against this background, the speakers of smaller languages like Hungarian are anxious about what is going to happen to their languages. I'm Hungarian, and I would like to speak about the position of Hungarian in a globalized world. Hungarian, with its approximately 13 million speakers, is not in a bad position in Europe. Hungarian is the 12th on the list of the biggest, most populous European languages. It is the official language of the Republic of Hungary, and here about 97% of the population, 10 million, claim Hungarian as their native language. It is also spoken by Hungarian communities in the 7 countries, which you can see on the map, in the 7 countries surrounding Hungary. The largest one is the Hungarian community in Romania, with about 1.5 million Hungarian speakers. Additionally, immigrant communities use Hungarian worldwide, first of all in the US, Canada, and Israel. The challenges which are posed today can be compared to Gutenberg's invention of the printing press. By the way, in Hungary, the printing press was established as early as 1473 by András Hess. It has made a number of developments possible, like grammatical and orthographic standardization of languages, the development of official national languages, the creation of different media like newspapers serving different communication needs. The printing press helped to improve the exchange in Europe, but it also led to the extinction of many European languages. Regional and minority languages were rarely printed. The internet will probably have the same impact on our modern languages. The feeling is that many European languages could become irrelevant in a networked society. But according to the UNESCO report on multilingualism, languages are an essential medium for the enjoyment of fundamental rights, such as political expression, education, and participation in society. A solution for ensuring the breadth and depth of language uses in the world and in Europe tomorrow is to use appropriate technology for communication in all the languages, just as we use technology to solve our transport and energy needs. Language technology, targeting all forms of written text and spoken discourse, can help people to collaborate, conduct business, share knowledge, and participate in social and political debates, regardless of language barriers and computer skills. It often operates invisibly inside complex software systems to help us already today to find information with search engines, check spelling and grammar in a word processor, follow the spoken directions of a navigation system, translate web pages via an online service. We will need language technology tailored to all languages that are affordable and can be integrated within various software environments. Without language technology, we will not be able to achieve a really effective, interactive, multimedia and multilingual user experience in the near future. We cannot simply transfer technologies already developed and optimized for the English language to handle Hungarian, and I'm sure this is true of very many Indian languages too. English-based systems for the syntactic and grammatical analysis of sentence structure perform far less on Hungarian texts due to the specific features of the Hungarian language. The Hungarian language development market is dominated by research groups at universities and academic institutes. It seems that only to create language technology resources for Hungarian to drive forward research and development, we need for large amounts of data and a close cooperation. Now, I would like to speak about why English-based systems perform so badly on Hungarian texts. I'll speak about the special features of Hungarian language. Hungarian is an island in Europe. Most languages in Europe belong to the Indo-European family of languages, but not Hungarian. Hungarian is related to Finno-Ugrian languages, related to Finnish, Estonian, and a number of minority languages spoken in the Baltic states and in Russia. Though Hungarian does not play a prominent role on the international scene, such as English, Chinese, and Hindi, or even French and German. The wider language group to which Hungarian belongs is the Uralic language group. The Uralic languages share a few features. There is no gender in Hungarian. The same word expresses she and he. 2, there are only 2 verb tenses, present and past. The future tense is circumscribed with modifying words and auxiliaries. 3, the way Hungarian and other Finno-Ugrian languages express direction by 3 by 3, 9 cases to express exactly where to is a movement with 3 sets of suffixes, where 3 sets of suffixes again, where to again expresses 3 sets of suffixes, and where from again the question honnan is again expressed by 3 sets of suffixes. I'm giving these suffixes. The 4th feature is that Hungarian is an agglutinative language, which means that we glue suffixes and endings to the words. For example, there is a word utazgathatunk in Hungarian. Utazgathatunk in Hungarian. So we travel, that is the utaz verb. This is the suffix for repetition is gat. For ability, we add the hot suffix, and plus the past tense of plural first person is tunk. And the fifth feature is which is very special, but it is not shared by the Uralic system, the Uralic languages, is that Hungarian has vowel harmony. We have sets of endings, such different sets of endings with different vowels, because each ending changes according to whether it has back or front vowels, and within the front vowels, whether they are labial or illabial front vowels. I mentioned that Hungarian is lonely and isolated. Ever since the German philosopher Johann Herder, in his History of Mankind, claimed that Hungarian is lonely and isolated in the sea of Germanic and Slavic people in Europe and will probably die out. This prophecy caused much heart, and this was epitomized in the Romantic vision of Nemzet Halál, death of the nation, which was popularized by leading poets. But Herder's teaching about the spirit of people, Volksgeist in German, was equally important to Hungarians. Herder claimed that all peoples have their own specific character rooted in prehistoric times, and that the language, popular tales, songs, and customs express this. So therefore, they have to be researched, and collected. The sudden interest in the language resulted in many studies which explore different facets of the Hungarian language. They were directed on finding the truly distinguishing marks of the Hungarian language at any cost. The universal search for characteristics which no other language possessed overstays the alleged or genuine peculiarities of the Hungarian language. Ferenc Kazinczy, the chief architect of the reform, who can be compared to Bharatendra Harishchandra in the second half of the 19th century, was proud of Hungarian language, but at the same time concerned about the shortcomings of the language. He initiated the language reform in the 1770s to create and introduce Hungarian terms for all concepts, notions, and activities. From the 1790s onwards, the use of the Hungarian language gradually gained ground in schools and establishments for higher education. A chair for Hungarian language and literature at Budapest University was established in 1792. And there were also scholarly works which used Hungarian. A Romantic poets Mihály Vörösmarty, János Arany, and Sándor Petőfi in the 19th century gave birthright to the newly created phrases and expressions, and actually created a number of phrases and expressions for Hungarian. For example, János Arany's vocabulary consisted the largest collection of words and phrases ever since. This consisted 287,000 words, and so on. Some of the modern poets have also created large vocabularies. The Romantic poets took up the project translating the best of world literature into Hungarian. First of all, Shakespeare, or just like very many Hindi poets worked on the translation of Shakespeare. But all of them contribute. Arany's work, his complete translation of Shakespeare's dramas, is the most outstanding contribution. In 1825, the Hungarian Academy of Sciences was established with the purpose of promoting Hungarian language. Till 1844, the official language of Hungary was Latin, but in 1844, the bill was passed in parliament, making the use of Hungarian legally binding in all public transactions. Hungarian has continuously adopted words into its vocabulary from other peoples, either on its long way from the Uralic Mountains to the territory of present-day Hungary, then Hungarian borrowed many words from neighboring Slavic languages. And there are also a number of words of German origin, since Hungary was part of the Austrian Empire and later of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. Yet, when I teach Hungarian, the students notice with amusement that for very many basic words, which other languages would use, Latin words, for example, violin, piano, and all, in Hungarian, we have created our own words. Ferenc Temesi, a Hungarian writer, formulated his relationship to Hungarian language in a way with which I, as a teacher of Hungarian, can identify to a great extent. And I quote, "Hungarian language is the greatest creation of our people. It is our everyday bread, our secret prayer, our fortress, and our church, to which we all add a brick, our disadvantage and our advantage, the guarantee of our survival." So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Margit, for your very detailed account of history and also giving us an overview that how Hungarian language has passes through various phases, and it is very useful information. And now we'll go to our next speaker, Professor Abdesh Kumar Mishra, who is currently, as I mentioned, faculty in English and Foreign Language University in Shillong campus. He has received master's and PhD degree in linguistics from Jawaharlal Nehru University, and he's very proficient in various other languages. He's also a visiting faculty at University of California, Berkeley, and the University of Chicago, USA. And he has published widely on the subject. So now over to you, Professor Mishra.
Now that we have heard two of the panelists talking about the Japanese situation and the other for Hungarian, so now I'll bring the audience to the Indian situation. What has happened to the languages and mother tongues that we have in India due to globalization in past, say, 2 decades or so. One thing that comes to our mind is that we have not been able to actually clarify in the minds of the public that what we mean by mother tongue and language. And that has resulted in a confusion kind of thing, that we interchangeably use language and mother tongue. And that's why that is reflected in our policies, and even the teachers who are occupied with teaching of Indian languages. So just briefly, I'll mention that. See, the reality is that all languages begin as mother tongues. There is no exception. All languages are primarily mother tongue. They begin as mother tongue. That means that the language that we acquire from our mothers and in respective communities. And when a particular mother tongue is used in certain domains like education, mass media, administration, and or judiciary, then that mother tongue becomes a language. So that's why we may have a situation where a cluster is there, and dialect continuum. Mother tongues will be there, many of them related, and you cannot actually define that where the boundary of one language has ended and the other has begun. And we have situations like if you travel in Bihar or UP, say from Bihar you start from Darbhanga, you speak Maithili, you go to Muzaffarpur, then suddenly there is some variation and you change to Bajjika, then you go to Gazipur, you have standard Bhojpuri. You enter Varanasi, you have a different variety of Bhojpuri in Varanasi and nearby areas, and you go to Mathura side, you have Brajbhasha, you have Lucknow, then you find Awadhi, you go to Meerut side, you find Khadiboli, and then you enter Delhi, you have the standard Hindi. So there is not even a break for, say, even half a kilometer in any part of India. And this is true for most of the languages, whether it's Tamil or Bangla or Odia or Marathi. So there will be a dialect continuum. And those dialects which are spoken within the home, they are mother tongues. And one of them, like as I mentioned, that Awadhi Brajbhasha or say Chhattisgarhi or Bundeli, Bagheli, Kumaoni, Garhwali, etc., they are all within the same language and they are all mother tongues. But only one of them out of the 57 mother tongues that are included under Hindi has become the language. That is the standard Hindi that we use in mass media, communication, then education, administration, and judiciary at certain level. So Hindi has become standard Hindi, the Khadi Boli. Same thing happens in Bangla. You have Rajbangshi, you have Manbhumi, you have Chakma, and many other varieties, Hajong. But the standard Bangla is used in the newspapers, education, administration, etc. So that is the reality. So talking of languages, we are not sure how many languages are there because all mother tongues, all they do not get chance to participate in these various domains. So there are languages which are different. They are not varieties or they are not mother tongues under some other language, but they don't have a chance to participate in mass media, in education, in administration, and judiciary. So they are also there. But overall, according to 2011 census, we have more than 1,300 mother tongues, and out of that, 273 are spoken by more than 10,000 persons, and the remaining ones are spoken by fewer than 10,000 persons. Then another thing that what has been happening due to globalization is that this distinction is gone. The language, the mother tongue, and the dialect, the varieties, that has gone. That is one of the biggest problem of globalization. That people, like we allowed linguists and scholars from outside, and they had a different vision. The way language, mother tongue, and dialect works in Russia or Japan or say Germany or England and America is different from the situation that we have in India. For us, language is there's no such distinction as anything is inferior or anything is superior. That kind of distinction we didn't have. But because of globalization, what has happened due to certain motivated external forces and also supported by some individuals in India, what kind of situation we have is that a new kind of false identity has been created. India never had this problem that in fight or between, say, two linguistic communities or between two dialects, we all respected each other so much. And if some of them went to certain areas, as I mentioned, education, mass media, etc., the others did not have any problem. Like Tamil has many varieties. The one spoken in Madurai, we have Kaikadi, and same is true for Malayalam in different areas. Kannada, there are so many varieties, and they didn't have any problem. Marathi has more than 50 varieties, and they didn't have any problem. But due to globalization and people not understanding what kind, how we visualize, how we see our languages, which is used for communication, is part of our being, part of our body. It's not separate. And as we had certain values, certain traditions, and we believed in coexistence and living in a peaceful situation, that was damaged due to globalization. And what happened? The new identities have been created. So even if there are varieties, smaller varieties, for example, in Arunachal Pradesh, we have a language called Adi, and the standard variety is known as Padam. And what happened? These various agencies like Samar Institutes of Linguistics, Ethnologue, UNESCO, the Atlas of Endangered Languages, they all had their own kind of motivations behind creating a situation where we see that we have different identities claiming that they are separate. So, for example, in Adi, we have some 15 varieties like Bori, Bokar, Milang, Minyong, Galo, Tangam, Padam, etc. And these agencies, what they did, they collected data from 2 or 3 individuals maybe, and they saw that there are some differences in the lexical item. Some words are different, and the way they pronounce certain vowels, there is some difference. And on that basis, they said that these are all languages. Now look at the situation. So what has happened? Something that we revered, something that no gave us peace, something that united us, that fabric has been disrupted by this kind of creation of a new identity, where any difference, any variation is thought of as a language, separate language and separate identity. And not only that, people are encouraged, instigated not to respect the others, thinking that, oh, Adi is my language, Bokar is my language, Tangam is my language in Adi, whereas the differences are very marginal. And this has been true for all the languages. As I already mentioned, that if you travel from one place to another, any big language or small language, you'll find variations in villages after, say, 4 or 5 kilometers or 8 kilometers, or people living in different hills in the northeastern area, like Pom will have some 30 varieties. Then Ao has some 4 varieties. Every language will have variety, depending, because they have not been talking to each other. They were kind of geographically segregated. But due to the pressure of globalization, that we had influx of people coming from outside, and then a lot of like migration and talking to each other, that led to this kind of situation. So that is one of the biggest, I would say, that the problem that we face, the mother tongues of India, in terms of globalization, is that false and new identities which are not based on reality have been created, and instead of remaining united, people are working to disunite us. That is the biggest hurdle. Other thing that has happened, that these various agencies which came from outside after the globalization effect, they emphasized, they thought as if Indians are not educated. See, we may not be writing and reading. That doesn't mean that people who speak smaller mother tongues or languages, they are uneducated. They are educated. The only thing is they are illiterate. And illiteracy has nothing to do with education. Being educated in mind and the way in their life, the values, the traditions that they have, the humanity that they have. So they did not lack in it. But the Western people, they thought that language for them was written only. They had seen language in the written form, most of them, and except for, say, Greek or Latin, or like languages like that, or German, others did not have written tradition. So spoken tradition so much. These languages developed much later. Out of Germanic German, we have English, and from Romance, say Italian, we had from Latin, we had Italian, French, and Spanish, and so on, with varieties. But for in India, there's so many hundreds of mother tongues coexisted from time immemorial. We never had a situation where only one language was there, only Sanskrit or only Tamil or only Santali. We can't say that. There have been so many hundreds of varieties all the time. So spoken language was more important. And as we know, as linguists and also as educationists and anthropologists, that it is the language that made us human. And what is that? We developed from 10 words or 20 words 1 million years ago, or say 70,000 years ago. We came to a state where we have so much of literature, spoken language developed so much, and now because of this pressure, that compartmentalization, that one clan, one sub-tribe, and you have one mother tongue, one language, and you have nothing to do with others. So that has stopped. And also, the orality was important in India. And actually, as humans, it is the oral language that makes us human. That gave rise to the language, the orality. And what would you include there in orality? See, language doesn't have any content as such, like social science or chemistry or physics or mathematics. The language itself is content. It does not have content. And the words, the symbols that we have in any language, that gets meaning and value from society and culture. And that's why we talk about that human language is culturally transferable. It is transmitted culturally. You cannot transfer it or transmit it through books or through machines. Human has to be there. Culture has to be there. So once you lose orality, and then also due to pressure of globalization, if you lose words, you lose your dances, dance forms, your dresses, your food, the way of cooking, then where's the scope for talking to each other? Our brain likes connections, stories, and people, when they sit together, they share their experiences with the children and people of different generation in the family. That is how we build our culture. That is how we build our society. So if the words are like depleting, the word stock is not there. The if all the cooking methods are same, if all the food items are same, if the dresses are same, if there is only one or two dance forms, if there is only one or two types of music, why will you need so many words and expressions? And then where how will you converse with each other? Why will you gather together? You remain individual. We become like a machine. We have one dance form, our TV is there, we watch it, or in our mobiles we can watch it, and we don't need any words. We don't need so many items related to food and various rituals. Our beliefs, our worldviews are different. If nothing, no words are required for that. If you have only one culture and one language, so by destroying the orality, the oral language, and the culture that it had through orality, that has been lost due to global pressure. And they want that every mother tongue, every variety has to be reduced to writing. That is not possible, and it's not also practical as well, because you cannot bring, say, all 1,300 mother tongues into a school education. You can't have newspapers and TV and radio in all 1,300 mother tongues. And then another danger is that the moment you reduce all mother tongues to only written form, and if oral literature is not there, oral tradition is not there, if the culture is lost, then what will happen? We'll have to have standards. So all 1,300 mother tongues will make one standard, and that the competition between one and the other, because all 1,300 mother tongues cannot be given the same space. They cannot occupy the same space. We have not been able to do that, and it's not practical and not useful also. So these are the things that is the outcome of, I would say, globalization, that division of the society in the name of mother tongue, and creating new identities. And identity meaning one person or five persons having one language, and they do not talk to each other. They feel that they are different. They have nothing to do with others. So respect is gone for the other mother tongues. People live in the different compartments, and so much of say intolerance and fighting and even violence in Northeast we see on the basis of language. Like there will be mother tongues which are 99.99% similar in terms of grammar, vocabulary, sentence, culture, the way they dress, the way they eat, those sub-tribes and clans. But after 1990s, what has happened? That people were instigated that no, you are different, because see, these five words are different, or you are not that particular sub-tribe or clan. Like we have example like Maring and Koibu, or Paula and Mao. So many are there, hundreds of them, especially in tribal language communities. So this kind of divide has been created, and then our resources are being sucked by these things, that we have to all the time take care of languages instead of taking care of the development in terms of like say infrastructure and road and facility of providing water, electricity, etc. Most of the time we see that so much we have to spend, the government and even the public, the people, that on taking care of these things that are outcome of this globalization, the way it has affected in destruction of say culture, the orality of languages, and creating a false or unreal identities in the name of language, because they are getting a job. In the people in Western, say American countries, and also in India, some people became say unemployed. They didn't have employment, nothing to do, know how to say instigate people and take advantage of that. So they had loss of job kind of thing. So this thing has been created, and that's why we see like a group of people working for past 10-15 years saying that 220 languages in India have died. And but the reality is, other than Andaman and Nicobar, where we had only say 5 speakers of a particular variety of a language, or 10 speakers of a mother tongue, and they were segregated, they did not mix with people. So when those people died, their language have died. That is reality. But in other areas, not even one single language has died so far. What to talk of 220 in 50 years? And if you look at the census, see, in 1951, we had 767 mother tongues in all, language and dialects included. Then in 1961, we had 1652 mother tongues. So that means actually in 10 years, we gained some 900 languages and mother tongues. If 1951, 767, and from that we go to 1652, including 100 foreign mother tongues. So we gained so many languages. And these people are the external forces, including some section of our Indian society. They created a hype that, oh, many languages have died, comparing the census. But actually, what happened in 1961, when people were asked that how many, what is your language? So they gave something like Bangalore, Muzaffarpuria, or say Madurai, or Dravida, Zoroastrian, Devanagari, Roman, Sikhi, Gurmukhi. These were given names of Harijan, or say Kumhar, etc. So even the profession, caste name, city name, these were given as languages because people were not aware. They speak language. We don't know which language. It's the outsider that gives name to a language first. We do not know. We just speak. Even in Sanskrit, we had the term bhasha, and that meant Sanskrit only. Or in many other varieties, like my mother tongue Maithili, we said this is Desi Bhasa. So the Desi Bhasa, Desil Baina, is just that. We did not know that we speak Maithili at that time, in the time of Vidyapati. So languages, people gave names like that, some 5 to 600 like that, and which have only one or two speakers. Now see, that can't be a language. If there are 200 mother tongues which are spoken by only one person, do you
Hello.
call it a language? Okay, so so that's why these people created a false notion that we are losing languages. Actually, we are not losing languages. Yes, some dialects have been lost, and that is actually a good sign. Convergence, and then convergence and creating a standard where various dialects, they have different spaces. Like in home, you talk in a particular variety. In market, you talk in a particular variety. But when you write in newspaper, these 4 or 5 varieties, instead of using all of them, you use only one. So that's a good sign. It's a sign of progress that dialects merge. Some of them, the smaller dialects, they associate themselves with the language, standard language, and they merge with that. That cannot be called death of a language. No language other than Andaman and Nicobarese languages has died in 50 years. What to talk of 220? So these are the outcome of the vested interest due to globalized forces. And we have to be aware that we don't have to lose our traditions. It's not good for humans. Humans became humans from animals because of this only. They had language, and we have come so far maintaining, having different varieties of cultures. As I mentioned, various items of it from say 10 or 100 words. We have thousands and lakhs of words, including Hindi. Hindi just 50 years ago, it did not have so many words. And this is true for many languages. From thousands, they have gone to lakhs of words. What for? If you want to use only English or only Hindi or only Assamese or only Marathi and no other variety or no other mother tongues, you eat only one kind of food, then what will happen to the society? We don't remain human beings. And actually, variety is the one that is required for sustenance of the human species on this earth. So I think I have covered all of it. Then if you have any questions, then I can answer that. It's such a broad topic, but I would like to answer some of the questions if you had in your mind. Thank you.
Thank you,
I'm
Professor
done.
Mishra. Thank you very much. It was really interesting because many of the issues you raised, you talked about, is entirely different from the what we see from the different perceptions and in the literature. And definitely, you have very uh, clearly talked about various challenges and your perception of like on the mother tongue on extinction or endangered mother tongues or on like your opinion is entirely different from many things what we hear from others. So I think this is something you have by giving those points you have raised very important issue, because sometime back I was talking to the UNESCO team and we were thinking of having a kind of language atlas of India, because uh, there is no clear picture on
Right.
what you have just mentioned here. I also believe that various figures are written in various documents, various people
Right,
who have done
right.
survey
And
or
people go by what is published.
yeah,
Sorry to interrupt you. And
yeah,
people go, layman looks at the newspaper publications. Whatever someone has said, they go by that. Everyone doesn't go and research. I'll give you quickly one example. Like, see, there are some 15 so-called languages. Actually, they are not languages in the 197 list. And you'll also find that constitutional languages, scheduled languages like Bodo and Manipuri, they are also endangered. Whereas there are certain languages which are really endangered and they don't figure in that. And
mm,
UNESCO Atlas, including Ethnologue, what they have done, they have classified Indian languages in terms of religion. So Garhwali, Kumaoni, you will see that in the last
yeah.
item will be religion
So
and Hindu, Muslim. So see, these are things people are not aware of, that how the divisive forces are working, and that is due to ignorance, I would say, that much research have not gone there. And the UNESCO list also 15 languages. They say that number of speakers unknown. Then how do you know that whether it is passed on to next generation or not, whether it is used in
yeah,
education or not?
true.
How do you know?
So
Right.
what I was thinking, I will share with you that we are in process of setting up a uh, consortium with the help of
Right.
UNESCO,
Yeah.
and we'll definitely looking for people like you in that consortium. And idea was that what UNESCO Language Atlas, International Language Atlas is different. We want to have a language atlas of India and also South Asia, because there's a lot of
Yeah.
similarities between India and South Asia.
Right.
So I have been talking to UNESCO people. Unfortunately, we have already crossed the time of the session, and
Okay.
next speaker, Professor Agarwal, is already waiting to start his talk. So we're not able to. But I want to have a like you have already given your inputs. Now I want to have a last comment from Yogi and Margit, if they want to make any last comment.
Sure, maybe I'll go first, and then Dr. Coves, please close. So right now, Professor Mishra was talking about extinction of language, and that has been a very consistent fear in Japan in going from monolinguistic to multilinguistic. But having said that, I feel that like as the flow of immigrants is growing, being monolinguistic is not the only choice that probably Japan has in front of us. So I think a
Hello.
golden mean has to be found out in terms of saving their own languages plus increasing the ability to converse with the world. Otherwise, uh, uh, right now, what is happening is that the education has actually become bifolk, different education for the Japanese kids and different education for the immigrant kids, and that I see will be possibly a very big problem in future. Similarly, in terms of information technology, the amount of information that keeps on changing in information technology is not at all coming at the same pace to Japan, and that will be a drawback for Japan. So again, I would like to close saying that uh, considering even the fear of say extinction of languages or mix up of languages, we will have to find out a golden mean between choosing between being a monolinguistic nation or a multilinguistic nation.
True.
So thank you so much for having me here in this session today, and it was so much of learning for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yogi. I think we need to respect multilingualism, and that is the theme of this year UNESCO Mother Language
Right.
International
Right.
celebrations. So, Margit, any last comment?
Yes, I also feel that besides, respecting multilingualism, I think it is a very important issue that societies should be multilingual. In Hungary, you can only get into university or college if you have taken a middle level, that means B level language examination, at least from one European language, because that's the one very major demand if you want to become an intellectual of being able to communicate with the external world. But at the same time, also, there is a lot of attention being paid to translations. So, for example, literature, 75% of the publications are translations. So that's also a very important process in the world, to be in touch with what is happening around you. And Hungary, I think, being part of Europe, everybody feels the demand. But it's really a question of survival. Your mother tongue, if you are monolingual, and then the question of your mother tongue is really a question of survival. And I think that all of us feel very emotional about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Margit. In any country, if we have to our mother tongue alive, most important thing is it is the responsibility of the family. Then it's the responsibility of the community, because no government policy and no government program can keep the language alive. Only the people can keep the language alive.
Right.
And there is no harm in learning many languages. I don't understand like why we can't learn multiple languages. I've seen people, our vice president, he knows 22 languages. I know the scholars like Acharya Hari Prasad Dwivedi, Smriti Kumar Chatterjee, even our former Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, he knows more than 10 languages. So I think best thing is that we should not forget a mother tongue. We may be, there is no harm in learning foreign languages or English or any other foreign language. And our Prime Minister has given a message that North Indians should learn South Indian languages and South Indian should learn North Indian language. That is another way of preserving and promoting the various languages. That's a very good message given by. So I think I strongly believe that in this world of globalization, the most important thing is that families and communities should come together.
See, actually, this was the pressure of globalization, that two important things. One, that mother tongue should be medium up to primary level, which were there in Constitution, and the three language formula, they were hidden and they were kind of discouraged until, say, 4 or 5 years ago. That was the reason, and that's why we lag behind. Now, better late than never. So now that the present government has taken care of for this aspect, and we have to implement it. That is one of the thing that see, the pressure of globalization only put these things behind the curtain. The three language formula and mother tongue education. Yeah, that's all.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Mishra. So with these words, I would like to express my sincere thanks to Yogi, Margit, and Abdesh for your wonderful views and your valuable time. And we really enjoyed having your company. And now we'll be moving to the next session. And my request to you, please be in touch. And I will be because through this international webinar, we are expanding our network to establish this consortium through national and international linguistic experts. So we look forward to.
And arts is the most important thing in language. See, language cannot survive without culture, and vice versa.
And to preserve the cultural diversity, you have to preserve the linguistic diversity.
Right.
Okay. So on this message,
Professor Mishra, that's where we are also working in. My organization is called Bhasha Akriti. So
right, I know.
So we would be in touch with you again for this.
Sure. Thank you.
So thank you, Ritu. And now, if you want, you can continue with our session. I would like to invite our guest speaker, Professor S.S. Agrawal. So Professor Agrawal will be speaking on technology for preservation of under-resourced languages. So just a few words of introduction about Professor Agrawal. He's a world-renowned scientist in the area of acoustic speech and communication. He obtained PhD from AMU and having research experience about 45 years as a scientist at the Central Electronics Engineering Research Institute, Pilani, and subsequently emeritus scientist of CSIR, and then as advisor of Center for Development of Advanced Computing, CRAC, Noida. He has worked as a guest researcher in MIT, Cambridge, and UCLA in USA. He has a major interest in speech perception, speech synthetic, speech recognition, and development of speech databases in Indian languages. Currently, he is the Director General of KIT Group of Colleges, and he is the one of the founder member of the consortia. I'm talking to all of you, and he is very enthusiastic and very dedicated professional in promotion of language technology. So, with these words, I welcome you, Professor Agrawal, for your kind time and valuable commitment to make this linguistic diversity technology oriented. And now I request to deliver your talk. Over to Professor Agrawal.
Thank you, respected Professor Gaur and all other distinguished speakers of the day. I really enjoyed listening the last session, and it's a great opportunity you have given to me to speak in this forum. And I would like to share my slides. The theme of my talk is Technology for Preservation of Under-Resourced Languages. And this is what I feel very strongly, that we need technology for preservation of the languages. And we have been talking about languages, so many languages, and many of them are at the verge of extinction and things like that. So what I feel, that for languages which are available now, living languages, as well as the languages which are diminishing, for all these languages, technology is one of the most important components. Now, from this slide, if you see, this is just a scenario which I am giving in the whole world. Languages spoken in the world are, this is all according to the UNESCO Atlas, 7,600 languages. And languages in Asia are 2,300. And total number of languages in India, we say, is 780. This is the latest figure. The languages we have lost in past 50 years are about 250. Languages spoken by more than 10,000 people are 122. This figure has been quoted by many speakers in your deliberations. And this is something on which we are concentrating nowadays, that at least these 122 languages should be preserved and they should be actually encouraged. Languages spoken by less than 10,000 people are large in number, that is about 658. Languages spoken by more than 1 million people are 30. And we are now at present considering only 22 official languages. So what is happening is, less than 2% of the languages are supported by language technology these days. I'll give you some of these examples in my later slides, but only 2% of the languages are supported by. The concern is, language without language technology will be less and less used, and languages with language technology will be more and more used. So many of the advanced countries which have developed language technology for their languages are progressing very much, and they are going ahead in a big way. The Asia at a glance, if you look at, there are 11 language families in this whole region, and these constitute Indo-European, Indo-Aryan languages, Iranian languages, Neurastrian languages, Dravidian languages, Austroasiatic languages. All these languages are existing in different groups, and we have to take care of these. Now, if we look at the statistics of the endangered languages in Asia, in 22 countries, this is the chart showing these. And please see the first bar here, that is representing India. In India, there are about 200 languages. You know, the exact figure is 187 or something like that, 197, some people say. These are the languages which are really endangered. And in other countries, China, Indonesia, Russia, the number is less and less and less. So the point of concern is that in India, we have about 200 endangered languages. Now, in South Asia is one of the world's most dynamic and diversified region in terms of religious diversities and religious communities that constitute Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, Buddhists, and Jains, etc. And out of which, if you see that in South Asia region, Hindus constitute about 80.5% of the community which speaks different languages. Similarly, ethno-linguistic communities are there in South Asia, which includes Dravidians, Indo-Aryans, Iranian peoples predominantly settled in western part of Pakistan, minority groups apart from the mostly belonging to Austro-Asiatic, that means Santhali and Munda, etc., and Tibeto-Burman. People of Nepal and Bhutan, as well as parts of northeastern Asia, forms another group which we call as Sino-Tibetan. In South Asia, country-wise statistics, if you see, the languages can be further categorized into other categories. The endangered language, we are talking about, let us say, 200 languages in India. What is happening here? There are certain vulnerable languages, definitely endangered languages, severely endangered languages, critically endangered languages, and extinct languages. So we have to set up priorities, and we have to concentrate now which are these languages which are on the verge of total extinction and how to preserve them. Similarly, how many are critically endangered? How many are severely endangered? So these points have to be considered very clearly, and these statistics actually help very much in understanding which languages are to be taken care on a priority basis. Now, language families in India constitute Indo-Aryan, which is the largest portion of the languages, that is about 78%. Dravidian languages around 19%. Austro-Asiatic, Sino-Tibetan, Tai-Kadai, and Great Andamanese, they constitute only 2.31 languages. So one has to consider these figures, that how to go about the total scenario of languages and preserve them. This is actually a language map of India, and one can see very clearly that Hindi constitutes the largest portion of population in the country. And there are other, this is a chart showing only the 22 official languages. But there are more than 22 languages which have to be taken care. In fact, when we talk about the languages which are spoken by more than 1 million people, they are about 30 languages. So apart from 22 languages, what I would like to say is that at least some of the other languages, about 8 or 10 languages, which are shown here on the later part of the chart, must be immediately taken care, which includes languages like Kurg, Khandasi, Tulu, Meitei. Meitei is another form of then Bodo language, Khasi language, Ho language. So these are the additional 10 languages or additional 8 languages which have to be also taken care. And now in this chart, if you see, this red mark is very important, What I am showing here is that in these parts of the country, the languages spoken are actually, the languages are called endangered languages. And these languages must be categorized very specifically and taken care about their preservation. So the theme of my talk is that digital preservation or use of technology is very important for storage, maintenance, and accessibility of a digital object over a long term. So digitization of the languages and their maintenance is very important. These strategies may include technology preservation, technology emulation, and data migration. The under-resourced languages, it can be done through collaboration with local people, which is very important. You know, without having collaboration of local people, we cannot get the actual data. You see, as Professor Mishra and other people have said, spoken language is different from the written language. Many of these languages are spoken, they don't even have the written form. And this spoken form of the languages can be captured through the collaboration of the local people only. Crowdsourcing method of technology, which I will explain a little later, is one important method by which the spoken data of the languages can be captured and preserved and analyzed further for preservation as well as communication purpose. So games and documentaries can be prepared for that. Free services can be provided for them. Dissipation and creating awareness about the language through technology to the local people. Because without the collaboration of local people, it is becoming very difficult to preserve the local languages. Now, languages which are not documented require more efforts towards its protection because there is no documentation available of these languages. Many endangered languages, which we call as zero resource languages, have no written document used mainly in communication. They communicate verbally and they do not have any written documents or literature or storybooks or things like that for that. But there is a lot of information, lot of cultural knowledge preserved in their languages, which they are speaking, which they just communicate and use it. So voice is the only medium to preserve the culture and the heritage associated with them. These languages can be captured through personal dialogues and stories. And there are devices which have been developed now electronically and with the help of ICT technologies through which they can be captured, personal dialogues can be recorded, and they can be further analyzed. This can be done through an interpreter also of the language working as a translator of the language. So ICT technology assistance is very necessary for supporting preservation of these languages. Now, I would like to say the type of technologies which are actually being used in different neighboring countries also and including in India for these languages. One of them is the collation technology. The keyboards, how many keyboards we have got in local languages. That is one thing which is very much required. And you know, once you have a keyboard in that particular language, you can use internet, you can use computers, you can use other devices. You know, we are not talking about the high literate people who only communicate with English. But if you have to communicate in local language and if you have to go down to the earth to the local people, you need keyboards in their local languages. The fonts creation, the localization of the language, the interfaces that are required, then how many dictionaries and particularly the phonetic dictionaries that we have made. So these things are important, which we should do. Spell checkers. Then comes OCR, optical character recognition. This is one technology which is doing a great help in preserving the old books, old manuscripts, old literature, even the calligraphy things and scripts and things like that. So to what extent OCR technology is useful and how good it is? The other latest techniques, which probably you are all aware, is one of these things is text-to-speech system. That means converting a written document into the spoken message. And similarly, ASR means automatic speech recognition. That means whatever I am speaking can be recognized by the computer And this can be one very good source to preserve the languages which even do not have their literature, which do not have the written documents. So that is known as automatic speech recognition technology. The other thing comes is the machine translation. That means speaking in one language and translating into another language. Some efforts have been done for written languages, and written documents can be translated from one language to another language, but their accuracy is also still questionable. It's not so much perfect as the human being. But more important thing is converting speech into speech. Now, in digitization phase, as you know, OCR technology is very important. So you have to prepare a document, image the document, convert it into a digital data, then you have to index it, reasonably release the data. So in the form of here, I have shown the disk. That means what I am showing here is that this preservation of a document or a picture is through an OCR technology is very important, where you have to go through these different kind of processes. And this has been so far done for about 12 languages, but not for all the languages. And we had to develop OCR technology for different languages. This is just a glimpse I'm showing you regarding the machine translation. Machine translation so far is perfect for written documents, written language, from one language to another language. And there are certain efforts which have been made in terms of the systems which have been developed in India, which we called as Anusarka is one, which converts from one language to another target language. And it was originally developed at IIT Kanpur and things like that. CDEC Pune has done a lot of work, IIC Bangalore. There are other institutes who are doing and different versions of this translation technology. And so this machine translation technology is also helping in preservation and communication of the linguistic information from one language to another language. This is one example I'm showing you when I was talking to you about crowdsourcing method of technology. And crowdsourcing method of technology is very simple, where you can work with a mobile phone, and in mobile phone, somebody is speaking and the data can be captured through a network, a corpus can be created, and then it can be translated, transcribed, and finally stored. I'm not going into the technological details of these systems. Such systems are available, and we have developed for crowdsourcing of the data spoken by different people in different places, even in remote places. So this is one thing which is very important for preserving the spoken data of different languages. Now, this spoken data will help not only in preserving the spoken language or spoken information, but also for further analysis, where it can be used for creating text-to-speech systems, automatic speech recognition systems, and speech-to-speech translation systems like that. So this speech corpus availability is one of the very important aspects of this whole process, where you record the audio signal, that means the spoken messages. They can be dialogues, they can be statements, they can be their stories and things like that. So this thing is going in a big way, I tell you, in many advanced countries for preserving their diminishing languages, which is now becoming very important, and we must go ahead in this area and do this thing. Similarly, there are systems which are developed for converting text into speech. So the core technology of speech technology is actually a kind of a intelligent signal processing technology these days, where you have to actually capture the linguistic information, the phonetic information, and then train the systems with different modules. And then you have a speech production engine where the properties of the human articulatory systems are actually modulated and then duplicated. in the form of a software and electronics, and the speech is created, and the speech must be in a natural way. That is the challenge. And in this challenge, India has come very successfully, and for about 11 languages, the text-to-speech systems have become available, which people can use now. So further work is going on, and for other languages, this technology is being adapted and further developed. This example I show you is for an automatic speech recognition system where you can have actually a dialogue also. Somebody speaks on a mobile telephone, even in a remote village, and this system comes through our computer network. NIC plays a role in giving the information regarding the domain specific information. Suppose you want to know what are the agricultural prices or what is the weather condition in the country nowadays, things like that. And then you can have a dialogue with that. So this automatic speech recognition technology for Indian languages have become quite important and available these days. So this is another major aspect. And if you see the status of the living languages, that means some of these languages, and the languages are mentioned here, one to Hindi, Tamil, Bengali, Telugu, Marathi, Indian English, Assamese, Punjabi, Manipuri, Bodo, and Gujarati. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 or 12 languages, we have a complete system of speech recognition and synthesis. For these, automatic speech recognition system is available, text-to-speech recognition system is available, and you can use in different applications. As I mentioned to you, you can use it in agriculture information system, information retrieval systems, weather forecasting system, and things like that. But this is the situation only about 11 languages. We have 22 official languages and 122 spoken languages by more than 10,000 people. So there is a big task ahead. And for this, a lot of effort has to be done in the technological development. And as you all know, dear friends, technology is highly language specific. So for all these languages, with the help of linguists, with the help of phoneticians, with the help of technologists, computer scientists, industrialists, these technologies have to be developed. And unless these technologies are developed, we will vanish our languages. As I said to you in the beginning, that if you have the language technology for a particular language, the language will be developed more and more, and you can use the language. But if you don't have the technology for the language, then whatever is available, it will diminish and diminish and diminish. So for the preservation of the language, language technology is one of the key things and most important. There is another project in which I was associated. It is speech-to-speech translation. So here the effort is being done in India for Hindi to English, Hindi to Bangla, Punjabi, and other languages. But at the international level, it is being done in Asia as well as in Europe in many languages. And at the moment, this project has gone ahead for about 26 languages. And in 26 languages, these speech-to-speech translation systems are being developed. And once this system is available where I can speak in Hindi and you can listen in either Urdu or Telugu or even in Hungary. One of the speakers was sitting here, and we have in this project, Hungary is also a participant. So what happens that, the life becomes very easy for information communication in that sense. Now, this is just an example. I tell you, there is an organization which you people all know, Technology Development of Indian Languages Group, which is a part of Department of Electronics and Information Technology, doing great service for the technology development of Indian languages for about last 25 years or 30 years, you can say. And they have actually assisted in developing technology for different languages in different institutions in the country. And that's how many of these efforts have come to the surface these days. But as I said, this is not the whole story. A lot of things have to be done to capture all these languages. So this is another portal available. There is a Indian Language Data Consortium portal in Hyderabad. This Institute of Languages, Central Institute of Indian Languages, is doing a lot of work in data capturing and also utilization of technology for preservation of that data and use it further. Now, there are some questions where how to address the processing of under-resourced languages, not taking much time, but just to tell you the salient points. Should be decided to undertake on under-resourced languages. Vulnerable languages, less resourced languages should be tackled first. Otherwise, they are at the verge of diminishing. Dead languages, there is a very good example, and which probably you are aware, that the Hebrew was a dead language once, but they could revive it because it was long back used as national language and had newspapers published in this language. So from these publications, they revived this language. Now, in an ancient language like Sanskrit, the knowledge and culture was transferred through verbal communication, Even now, this practice is prevalent in some areas. Hence, efforts may be made to capture such verbal information and digitize them. Whatever information now available in Sanskrit, and particularly there are still verbal communications going on in Sanskrit for knowledge sharing, and I think they must be captured and digitized and then further analyze what is hidden knowledge in that. With the availability of the database, it becomes easier to handle this language, whereas most of the endangered languages in India don't have written documents available. So these are the only things available. Then I have answered this question, how to produce the language technology for under-resourced languages. Because of the indigenous nature of the languages, they have very limited resources due to small population size. The word structures are also so different other than major languages, and their writing systems are also not available. With such condition, merely applying current existing approach, deep learning is one of the new artificial intelligence technology which is used in language processing, and we are using it extensively in automatic speech recognition system. So such applications would be difficult. So the great results of deep learning and the proven success in case of language adaptation too will not be applicable here. But standardization and digitization are the two critical aspects of language technology for under-resourced languages about which we should pay more attention. UNESCO's effort for heritage protection can be extended to language roots also. Why it is nice that UNESCO has taken this on a priority basis. And it was not only the year of language last year, 2020, but they have now declared a decade of language technology. So this decade of language technology is going to be a big landmark in development of these resources. Some resource kits must be developed. In case of zero-resource languages, data augmentation from similar characteristics languages can be done. These are some of the technologies that can be utilized for getting the resource for no-resource languages. leveraging existing corpora of data and combining linguistic information from linguistic families would be very helpful. How to ensure? Now, I would come to the this important subject. It is suggested that a consortium of URL technologies, institutions and experts should be formed to efficiently facilitate this work in different Asian countries, In fact, in Japan, 2 years ago, I was attending a URL consortium, and then they had recommended it very strongly. Then in each country, there should be a consortium for URL under-resourced languages, which can pay more attention and then go ahead with this kind of work. There are other things which I will not touch upon here. Now, the open issues I will put to the audience is that there are certain tasks which we must concentrate. Efficient data and knowledge collection methodologies for these languages. Leveraging similar well-resourced languages. Actively involve native speakers and linguists in this task. Transcribing and translating unwritten languages, dialectal variation, code switching, and code mixing. Well, dialectal variation is an important thing. People can say that these are all individual languages, and if one dialect of a particular language is diminished, it does not matter, but that is not true. That dialect has got its own knowledge, its own culture, its own importance. And so the dialectal variations of that language must be captured. Code switching and code mixing are technological terms which we engineers used for actually knowing the variations of the language where we do not have the data by code switching it to a similar language which has got some similarity in their structure, similarity in their sound, similarity in their phonemes and things like that. So impact of HLT technologies on languages and ASR performance, automatic speech recognition, is one of the most important things which must be developed for those languages where ASR work has not been done. It has been done only for a few languages. And that was my last slide. So I would like to thank you, Professor Gaur, once again for giving me this excellent opportunity to talk in this particular webinar.
Thank you, Professor Agrawal. You are an asset for India in the field of language technology. And I know you are promoting this cause internationally in various platforms. And
Thank you.
Thank you very much for this wonderful talk. And I'm sure you have covered almost everything, but one aspect which I believe that is also very important, the issue of ancient scripts. Like, we have large amount of manuscript heritage, and all these ancient script like Brahmi, Prakriti, Pali, Sharda, Modi, Tiglari, all these are also very, very important scripts because it contains a lot of manuscript heritage of this country. And without digitization of these scripts, because OCRs are not available in any of these scripts also. So really it's a challenge. Actually, somewhere I strongly believe apart from government institution, I think we need some kind of public-private partnership to deal to resolve this issue of OCR, availability of OCR for various scripts, because the challenge what we have in this country are not in any other part of the world, because either they are monolinguistic or Roman script is the most popular script in almost many of the world languages. So kind of challenges we are facing in terms of OCR technologies, I think, are entirely different. But surely we need some kind of cooperation from various. So let me see if we have any questions. Then I will take up first question and then I will talk.
Yeah, sure, Doctor. Yeah, Professor Gaur, this is a very, very important aspect of preserving the manuscripts and the calligraphy scripts and other things. and it contains lot of knowledge and information probably about which we are not so far aware. You were talking about Brahmi script and many other scripts. OCRs have not been developed very successfully for many of our ancient scripts, and so it is very pertinent. It's a very relevant question that efforts must be done to develop OCRs for most of these scripts. Yes, you are right. For their preservation.
We'll be closing this session now. I would, with thanks to Professor Agrawal, I think these words, I would like to express my sincere thanks to Professor Agrawal for very happily, kindly agreeing to deliver this talk. Wonderful talk. I'm really got a lot of new information from you, and I'm always a great admirer of your commitment and your work for this promotion of language technologies. So thank you very much. We look forward to your continued association and contributions.
Thank you very much, and I would be always glad to assist you, Dr. Saab, and we eagerly look forward for the continuation of this consortium and more work and taking up more challenges through this consortium. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Agrawal. I thank Ms. Ritu Mathur, founder of Bhashakriti, for wonderfully coordinating the sessions and in my absence, doing the work in a very systematic manner. We like to close the session and for the day.